Okay, hi everyone. Again, I hope you're all keeping well. My name is Rahul. For those who haven't seen me as yet, I'm one of the co-founders of Travel the Unknown. Thank you for making yourselves available this morning for our very special presentation on Vietnam. And I'm delighted that our local partner and very good colleague of ours, Nick, will be joining us live from Ho Chi Minh City very shortly to take you on a tour through Vietnam. I did actually want to start today's presentation with a short introduction video, which we put together, but given I've experienced personally various technical issues trying to stream video via Zoom, we thought against it. However, it is available on our website, which you can look at your own leisure, and I'll come on to that at the very end of the presentation. So I'm going to go over the usual housekeeping rules, so apologies to those of you who've already seen these before. So basically, if you could please keep, as I mentioned earlier, keep your microphones muted at all times. Keep your video disabled as well. And for the Q&A session, as we've done in the past, we'll be using the chat function in Zoom. You should see that option at the bottom of your screen if you're using a desktop or laptop. If you're using a mobile device or a tablet, it may be available via the participants button there. I do have a very temperamental internet connection, so if I suddenly freeze with my mouth half open or eyes closed, it will be temporary, I promise you. That's want to now introduce you to Nick. So Nick is originally from the UK, but he spent many years living in Southeast Asia, the last 3 of which he spent in Vietnam. He's often seeking out new experiences and new patches, undiscovered patches to explore in the country, and he's a core part of our wider team there. He and his colleagues in Vietnam, they help to curate our tours, and Nick oversees our operations. So Nick, I'm going to hand over to you if you would like to share your screen, please, and I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, okay, great stuff. All right, good morning everyone from Saigon, afternoon here. It's rainy season. It's been lashing it down for the last 3 hours, so hopefully it's going to dry out before I go home. Usually it starts raining about 5 minutes before I leave the office, but hopefully we're a little bit early today. I'm going to go over a bit with you about Vietnam, some of the things that we do here, some of the questions that we often get asked, see if we can solve some of these for you. Talk a little bit about our team here. Most importantly, what seems to happen a lot is the weather and when to go. Some of our signature tours and the products that we put together, working with Travel the Unknown, really to kind of give you that authentic local experience. And then a few top tips for when you're considering booking Vietnam, things to look at when you're trying to design an itinerary. And then hopefully at the end, a couple of the hotels that we love, that hopefully you love. Okay, let me see, get to the next slide. All right, so the team here in Vietnam is predominantly here in Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh. And then we have an operations team in Hanoi and Hoi An. So these are small teams up there. But essentially, it means that no matter where you are in the country, someone is there close at hand to help you while you're here. We have a 24-hour hotline, so no matter what happens, there's always someone to help. Okay. Looking at a couple of the major destinations here and some of the weather patterns and times to go. We generally split Vietnam into 3 sections: the north, the center, and the south. Hue being about the middle point from north to center, and then Dalat and south, Saigon and the Mekong Delta. Weather-wise, it's a difficult question here. As you can see from the map, it's a long, long country. There's about 3,000 kilometers of coastline, so there are some lovely beaches, which is nice. But it does mean that the weather can change dramatically. Last January, I flew from Saigon up to Hanoi. January the 5th, I was wearing shorts and flip-flops and a t-shirt. And when I landed in Hanoi, everyone was screaming as they were getting off the plane. I didn't have any idea what was going on until I walked out and realized that the wind chill was just crazy, and it was actually 4 degrees. So in a 2-hour flight in the same country, we went from 35 degrees to 4 degrees. It does get chilly. Certainly Sapa, the Sapa region, Hanoi and Halong Bay. It's a tough time to go in November, December, January. Halong Bay especially, not that it's cold, but you do actually in that period get like very low sea mist, which can hang around for a few hours in the morning. So if you're thinking about going to Halong Bay, be a little bit careful. Some of these things we'll talk about in the top tips as well. Moving down south, Hue and Hoi An and the Trang, these are generally, they don't have the same winter that you do up in the north. Hue is definitely one of my favorite cities in Vietnam. You do have to get a little bit lucky with the weather. It does rain a lot, especially up in October, November. But certainly if you get good days, it is absolutely gorgeous. It's very green. The Purple River runs all the way through it. It's a real lovely mix of kind of modernity and old world with the ancient city and then the south of the city. Then moving further south, you've got Dalat. So Dalat is actually up in an area called the Central Highlands. So Nha Trang and Hoi An it's quite flat actually, and then there's a plain and it goes up over a mountain ridge and then up on the top of these highlands, this Central Highlands. They have a very different climate to the rest of the country. There are a lot of pine forests. It's actually weird. It kind of reminds me of being home sometimes. The farmers have put up dry stone walls. There are horses in the fields. Being a Yorkshire boy, it kind of takes me home a little bit. Unfortunately, there's no Malham Cove, but anyway. Then into Saigon, and Saigon is obviously, it's hot all year round. So again, being a pale ginger Yorkshire boy, living in the sun doesn't really help that much. It does rain a lot in the rainy season, but they tend to be downpours for an hour or so, heavy, and then they die out for the rest of the day. I would actually say that it shouldn't be a discouragement to travel during the rainy season. The day tours can still go ahead in the majority of cases. And actually it's quite impressive to see the locals working and traveling and going about their normal life during the rainy season. I mean, as long as you're sitting in a nice little cafe or a bar or something, watching everyone driving around on their mopeds, it's quite a sight for sure. Later on, if you've got specific questions about any of these locations, please just write down those questions and let me know later. So I want to touch on a little bit about a couple of the day tours. They kind of give you an idea of the ethos and the idea that we have when we're designing these tours and working with Travel the Unknown. And like I say, it's all down to that local, authentic vibe. We understand, when people travel, there's a tendency to kind of look at that TripAdvisor tick box and try and tick off everything that you can see. And Saigon's actually a perfect example of why we don't do that. So in Saigon, our signature tour here, there's no war museum, there's no reunification palace, there's no Notre Dame Cathedral. All these places are very close together in the city. So you can actually do that on your own in an afternoon. There's lots of signs and everything's there for you to work on. But what you can't do is go to the places that we would take you, or you would never think of going there. So you can see the picture on the left here. There's Tao Den Park, which is in the center of Saigon. First thing in the morning, it's full of locals doing their Tai Chi. This picture was taken right before this young lady at the front dragged me in and got me to do some Tai Chi. But it's a really lovely first thing in the morning, have a coffee and walk through the park. We take you to an abandoned bunker that was used as a printing press for propaganda during the war. Places that you wouldn't even knew existed. When I was putting this together, I took a guide with me. He'd been guiding for 20 years from Saigon, and when we came out of this place, out of the bunker, he had this look on his face, and I was like, "What's wrong?" He's like, "I've lived here all my life. I never knew this existed." So this is the kind of thing we're trying to put together. And then, as you can see, the picture on the right, we finished the day with this really cool abandoned apartment complex, which is right in the center of town. And they've been turned into all these cool little boutique coffee shops and bars and restaurants and boutique shops. And yeah, and we've got a tea tasting ceremony that we we do at the end. Really lovely way to finish the day. But really, it's kind of highlighting that idea of taking you off the beaten path within these very well-known destinations. Okay, so the next one, another example of this is the Discover Way, the authentic way. Similar signature idea. You know, when you go to Hue, it's very difficult to go to Hue and do a day tour and not include the Citadel. I mean, when you have somewhere that has a UNESCO heritage site, if I took you there and didn't take you, you'd be thinking that we were a little bit crazy. But instead of doing a 3-hour tour of the Citadel and going through all the history with the numbers and the figures and everything else, we train our guides really carefully and extensively about storytelling and relating it to the travelers. So this is really key. The guides there are from Hue. Yes, we go to the Citadel, but for no more than an hour. And when we do, we go to places like Tien Mu Pagoda, very famous pagoda in Hue. But instead of just talking about the dates and numbers, we talk about the fact that there's actually a curse on the pagoda. And any couples who go there, you should never profess your love to each other because it means that you're going to break up. So if any of you are thinking about coming to Hue and asking your partner to marry you, just don't pick Tien Mu Pagoda. But, you know, as well as that, we go and meet one of the last remaining descendants of the last dynasty in Vietnam. Lovely, lovely lady, speaks great English. She's also an expert in about 4 or 5 different traditional Vietnamese musical instruments. So she'll give you a cup of tea and play some music as well. It's just a really lovely way to see the city and do it in a slightly different way. And then finally, this is one of my favorites. This is actually an area between Hue and Hoi An, near the Hai Van Pass, the famous Top Gear road. It's an inland lagoon. There's some lovely little fishing villages along the side. And it's a great way to break up the journey between Hue and Hoi An. It's about a 3-hour drive, and about halfway through you stop here. They've got you go out onto the lagoon with the family in the fishing boat. They take you to the big Chinese fishing nets, the big square ones that drop in the water. You can climb up and you use your feet to do the rigging. It's a really cool, they've got an oyster farm there. And then you go to their stilted house on the lagoon and have lunch cooked by the mum who has the most infectious laugh. It's ridiculous that you can't help but laugh. She doesn't speak a word of English, but it's a really amazing kind of local experience that, yeah, you should definitely look at these kind of things. So these are the day tours that we kind of put together. It gives you an idea of what we're trying to do, working with Travel the Unknown, and giving you an idea, giving you a sample of the kind of stuff that we do. We then created something called our personalities portfolio. A lot of people, a lot of travelers talk about, wanting to meet local people and hear about their lives and all their interesting stories. But the problem is that, 99% of us are pretty boring. We don't really have that great and interesting story to tell. So we've actually gone out and found a collection of people across the country with these fascinating stories. So these could be people like Mr. Hong, who's an ex-fighter pilot, who was actually the first Vietnamese fighter pilot to shoot down an American. And then 3 months later, he was shot down by an American. And then 30 years later, they were reunited, himself, the American that he shot down, the American who shot him down, and the American helicopter pilot who rescued the American soldier, fighter jet. And now they're best mates. They go up and they go to Christmases and weddings or family reunions. It's lovely. I met him a couple of years ago. You can kind of see from the pictures, but he kind of looks like a Vietnamese Mr. T. I was petrified when I first met him. We went to his little house in Hanoi, and he was there with his shaved head and all these gold rings and bracelets. He was wearing a big bomber jacket and his camo pants. I was like, what have I got myself into? But really lovely, lovely guy, and super open about sharing his experiences and everything else. So we have people from someone like him to artists, photographers, historians, people who run sustainably focused projects. We have a great one in Hoi An where a lady who works on riverbank erosion projects, trying to rebuild riverbanks because there's a lot of flooding in Hoi An. The river there has just widened exponentially over the last 10 years. So she's actually using different types of plants and reeds and bamboo to strengthen, not just to strengthen the actual, the side of the river actually in the water, but also on the banks, like seeing what plants fit better. It's fantastic, it really is. So these kind of things, we can always tie these into your itineraries. If you've got something that you're interested in, you know, talk to the team at Travel the Unknown and they will try and work with us, and we'll find someone that really fits with you guys. Similarly to this, we kind of put together something called our unique experiences. For us, like the personalities, this is what people go home and they talk to their friends and family about. You know, like, it's great to go and stay at a lovely hotel, but it's the people and it's the things that you do when you're on your trip that's the stories, the funny stories that you talk about. So for example, the picture on the left is a beachside barbecue in Hoi An. You get your private table set out on the beach with your tiki torches everywhere, and you've got a fresh seafood barbecue for you and your family, and it's really fantastic. The beach in Hoi An is huge, so we can take you to an area where there's nobody there, and obviously it's after dark anyway, so if there are people walking along the beach, it's a couple of people down by the water anyway. One of the picture on the right is obviously a football match. I wanted to show you this because, you know, over here in Vietnam, we have a very organic way of product design. This product was actually put together by someone in our contracting team. Her husband is a coach for one of the local football teams. So what we do is we take you and we before the match, you go to one of the local little areas, and you meet the fan club, and you get your red shirt, the Saigon FC shirt, and your flag and everything else. You meet all the fans, and then you go in and you sit or you stand with them, sing and dance and do everything else, watch the game. I can't guarantee the quality of football is very good, but being a Leeds fan, I'm not used to watching good football anyway. And then afterwards, we take you for a local Vietnamese barbecue at just a little local place, you know, sitting on your little plastic red chair, drinking a local beer. It's really fantastic. So again, these unique experiences, we work with Travel the Unknown on these, but the key is for you guys to really talk to the team there and let them know your interests, what your family is interested in, you know, how active you are, what you want out of your trip to Vietnam. And if it's not something that we're already doing, you know, we can actually tailor it and we can find something that really suits you guys. Okay? Okay, top tips. So as I say here, it's a big country, lots of regions. And unfortunately, the time of the year that you want to travel might not be the ideal time to do everything. Certainly, if you're not going to be doing more than 2 weeks, we wouldn't really suggest doing a full country tour unless you really are happy to just jump around, because there's a lot to explore. And traditionally, we tend to do like the north and the center, or the center and the south, and not combine the three if it's just a short, you know, 10-day trip. So picture on the left is obviously Halong Bay, but this picture is something you will very rarely see in actual Halong Bay, one boat on the water on its own. Halong Bay, the area, is actually split up into 3 bays. So you have Bai Tu Long in the north, actual Halong Bay in the center, and Lan Ha Bay in the south. So the top and the bottom, Bai Tu Long and Lan Ha, are much, much quieter than the central Halong Bay. The main reason is that the boats need to get special licenses to travel to those different bays. And most of the single, like 1-day tours or the 2-day 1 nights, they will go, a lot of the local ones especially, will go to actual Halong Bay. And sometimes there's upwards of 300 boats in the water at the same time. We find that a lot of people tend to book 2 days, 1 night. But if you've got the time, I would suggest to contemplate looking at the 3-day, 2-night trips, because it means you can get further out into the bay and there's even fewer boats, and that maybe you can find this picture there. So certainly, you know, if you've got any questions about Halong Bay, please ask at the end. This picture on the right, obviously, is a stunning Instagram photograph of Sapa, and this is one of the biggest problems we have. You can see in the picture it's harvest time, which is in September, and it's a beautiful time. August, September, July, August, September, fantastic time to go to Sapa if you want that Instagram picture of the rice fields. Unfortunately, we still get people who want to travel in November, December, like I said before, where it's cold and it's wet, and there's no rice fields. They are just brown, muddy fields. Now, if you want to travel and you're going there because you want to hike, you want to trek, and you want to cycle, you know, Sapa is still absolutely stunning even at that time of the year. There are alternatives. Pulong, which is the last remaining primary rainforest in Vietnam, absolutely gorgeous, a bit more of a kind of jungle feel, I guess, to it, lower down the mountains. The accommodation is a bit more basic, but it's absolutely gorgeous for going for a couple of days. The wildlife there is fantastic. The other option is Mai Chau, which is kind of a lowland version of Sapa. So it's the same rice fields, same beautiful valleys, but actually the rice harvest is a little bit later in the year, so you can still go there as well. It's also a 2 and a bit hour drive from Hanoi rather than the 5 hours to Sapa. Okay. The picture on the left here is obviously a market. The markets in Vietnam are fantastic. I mean, you just get everything. It's fantastic to go and just wander around on the weekend. But I wanted to put this up to also talk about the Mekong Delta and the floating markets there. So the floating markets, for a start, they are a bit of a dying breed here. With the road infrastructure especially improving over the last kind of decade. Basically, the rivers aren't a priority anymore. They're not being used as they used to be to ferry goods from source to market. So they're just not there anymore. The ones that you do see are the ones in Can Tho and in Kai Bay, and they're a little bit more touristic, and they're often the ones that you can do in a day trip from Saigon. The best thing to do is to get further out into the delta. The closer you go to the Cambodian border, the more rural it is, and then when you get up to Chau Doc and the border, there's definitely more authentic floating markets. Like I say, the Mekong, it's actually a very special place. It's very flat. It does take from Saigon to Can Tho is about a 3.5 hour drive, but actually you're not that far from the Cambodian border. There are a few boat companies who do really lovely 2-day, 1 night, 3-day, 2-night boat trips, and they go from Saigon to Phnom Penh. So if you've got a little bit of time and you don't fancy just taking another flight, I would really look at those cross-country, those cross-border boat itineraries, because they're really fantastic. And the boat companies are great. They do really lovely day excursions as well to get you off the boat. So you're not just sitting on a boat for 3 days, okay? And then the last picture here, this is the Japanese bridge in Hoi An. You may have heard that Vietnam has an issue in certain places with over-tourism, and the old town in Hoi An is definitely one of those. It's been struggling. Right now it's lovely. I'm going up next week. I can't wait. There's nobody there. But it does attract a lot of group tours, especially, and big group tours. So what we do, as we've talked about with the other products, it's a very simple fix. We're not reinventing the wheel. All the other tours, they take the same route to walk through the old town, while we go through all the little back alleys, all the little passages where you actually see local life. You see the people who live in Hoi An. You interact with them. It's fantastic. And then we just go at a different time of the day. So most of certainly the bigger groups, they tend to go in the evening. We go first thing in the morning. We get out before it gets hot and before the crowds arrive. So again, so something to think about for sure. Okay, just very quickly, a couple of the hotels that I wanted to mention. As you can see from the pictures, this absolutely stunning property in Can Tho, the Azarai. One of those places where, after a 3 and a bit hour drive from Saigon, it's a lovely spot to stop for a day or two. It's got its own riverside location, you can see in that last picture. And it's a real peaceful, tranquil part of the country. And something that's not really offered in the Mekong Delta very much. So certainly worth looking at. And then the last one is the Topaz Eco Lodge. This is about half an hour south of Sapa Town, which at the moment is, Sapa Town it's a bit of a no-go area. It's just a construction site, so we try and steer people away. And this is one of the properties that we do look at. As you can see from the middle picture, it's got quite a view. It's basically on its own mountaintop with the mountains surrounding it. So every villa have this incredible view. And then they've actually got 2 of these infinity pools that are shaped to match the contours of the rice fields, of the rice paddies. So it's an absolutely stunning location. I don't want to make you jealous, but I'm going up in a couple of weeks. So if you need me to send me some pictures or I'll send some selfies to you, I don't mind at all. But yeah, I think that's about it from me. I'm going to hand you back to Rahul, who's going to talk to you a bit about the actual Travel the Unknown packages. And then I'm here to answer some questions at the end. Okay?
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. So yeah, just as Nick's been saying, you know, we're delighted to offer kind of various trips in Vietnam, which I'll come on to very, very shortly. For those of you who may not have seen this slide before, just a quick summary of who we are, what we do. So we run small group tours. So we've actually reduced the group size down from 12, now down to 8 people on any group tour. We run tailor-made trips and private tours. We have very good personal knowledge of these destinations. A couple of my colleagues from within our team have been out to Vietnam, researched trips there, and obviously we work alongside Nick and his team to keep on developing, you know, some really interesting options for you there as well. So again, we work with really good partners. We've been mentioned in a variety of major guidebooks, and we are obviously fully financially protected and ATOL bonded. And we were the winners of the British Travel Awards in 2018. So on to some of our trips. So this is kind of the perfect trip for first-time visitors. It's called Essential Vietnam. It's a 14-day trip, and it takes in some of the key places you can see there. We organize this on a private basis. And again, there's more information on that trip on our website. This is a really good tour for those wanting to get a bit more off the beaten track. Maybe you're a second-time visitor to Vietnam, or if you have a bit longer, you can take in some of these places mentioned here. We are running this as a group tour next year, so the dates are shown there. And again, we could run this as a private tour as well. For those who like delving into some of the kind of culinary secrets of Vietnam, this is a fantastic trip. It's kind of a mixture of culture and cuisine. And again, it takes in certain key sites. And again, Nick alluded to some of the food experiences you can have in Vietnam. And again, we have group dates scheduled for those next year. And again, they can run on a private basis. If you have longer in the area, then we would certainly suggest, you know, maybe combining Vietnam with some of its neighbors, Cambodia and Laos. So this is a 19-day trip, again, focusing on the classic sites. And again, we run this on a private basis. And then we have a hidden equivalent of that. So again, taking in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. But this again gets a bit more off the beaten track, and we have group departure dates set for those next year. And again, as with all tours, they can run on a private basis as well. We have launched a new zero deposit scheme. Some of you might recall this from the previous presentations where I alluded to the fact we were going to be bringing this in. We understand it's a very challenging time for people to make decisions about, you know, when to travel and, of course, you know, the implications of that in the current climate. So we are trying to make that as easy as possible. So basically, at the moment, you can hold your place on any group tour at no cost. If it's a tailor-made trip, we do require a deposit of £500 per person, but that is fully refundable. However, once we feel a tour is viable and can run, then the deposit of 20% would be payable. But if for any reason we had to cancel the trip, primarily due to COVID-19, which we normally would decide 4 weeks before the start date of the trip, then all your monies would be refunded for the land tour component. This offer is valid on all bookings made by the end of the month. And again, there's more information on our website, traveltheunknown.com/0. Okay, and if anyone has any questions, please send them via the chat. And again, you know, we're more than happy to answer those. So I've got one here for Nick. Let me just check. For Nick. Basically, Nick, they're asking, what are hiking options like in Vietnam? I know you had mentioned, you know, some of the areas in the north, but maybe you could go into a little bit more detail, please.
Sure, not a problem, yeah. The north is the predominant area for hiking here. It's, you know, weather-wise, it's certainly the best. You can also go down to Phung Nha, to where the caves are, the cave system. And this is something it's fantastic. There's one operator who's allowed to do the overnight treks there. Then there's a mixture of, you know, you can find however difficult you want that trek to be. But certainly, you know, if you wanted to do somewhere like Mai Chau, for example, we talked about before, there's some lovely kind of day hikes that you can do that take you out into the countryside with the ethnic minority villages, specifically up in the north as well, which are fantastic. But, you know, there are multi-day treks that you can do if you're really brave, I had a friend of mine who walked from Hanoi to Saigon a couple of years ago, but I don't think you've probably got time to do that.
Okay, great, Nick. And I mean, obviously I alluded to the fact we run a food trip there, but could you kind of explain a little bit about the variety of food and what food is like in Vietnam, and also for vegetarians as well?
Yeah, I mean, vegetarian food here is actually very easy to come by. That, you know, you could see just from the picture of the market that I put up. You know, they really are into their vegetables here. It's all very fresh. It's funny that, you know, there are certain dishes that everybody knows about, but they are so different across the country. So even something like a spring roll, you know, they'll be using different ingredients, they'll be cooked different ways. You know, sometimes you only really find the fresh rolled ones, sometimes they're fried. Same with something as simple as a pho. You know, you taste the pho in any of those 8 cities on that map, and they will all taste very different. The southern food tends to be a little bit saltier, to my palate anyway. It's a little bit, you know, a bit subjective, I guess. But it's, you know, there are definitely certain dishes that are predominantly made in, or famous in certain areas. You know, so bún bò Huế is obviously made in Hue. In Hoi An, you have something called cao lao, which is it's actually a dry noodle dish. And when you go to Hoi An, you'll see that a lot of the buildings are 2 stories, and what would normally, or what used to happen, is that people would not live on the ground floor. It was just basically storage and for bikes and whatever else, and that they would live on the second floor. And obviously, because Hoi An historically it floods, or used to flood a lot and really heavily, they would dry their noodles up in the second floor. And this is where so that when it flooded and they couldn't get out of the house, they had a store of food. So this is where this famous cao lao, this dish, has come from as well. But it's, you know, it's one of those things, you could go and do a food tour in every city along the way, and you'll never have the same thing. It's fantastic, yeah. The seafood especially, you know, if you're a seafood addict, like I say, it's the whole half of the country is a coastline, so it's certainly worth looking at.
Great. And again, you obviously in the last slide, you touched on accommodation. I mean, what are the options like, kind of, you know, going up the country, you know, say from Saigon to Hanoi, you know, what kind of accommodation I want to expect, and would you recommend typically?
I mean, it's the kind of thing where, you know, all of those destinations have got anything from hostels to 5-star luxury resorts where you've got your own private villa and private pool. So it really comes down to, obviously, your budget, but what kind of thing you're looking for. We've seen an increase in the last couple of years of the more independent, smaller, boutique-y kind of properties, but they're still a little bit few and far between. Certainly on the coast, when you get to Nha Trang, Hoi An and Da Nang, Hue, there are some really lovely coastal resorts. And then we didn't really touch on them, but also you've got the islands in the south, Con Dao, and Phu Quoc. Phu Quoc being the more kind of popular, more maybe well-known one, which is almost, it looks on the map like it's actually in Cambodia, but we won't get into that discussion. And then Con Dao, which is kind of southeast of Saigon in water, obviously, and it's beautiful, really untouched. There's only there's a 6 Senses on there, and then there's Paula Condor, really lovely properties. I mean, the 6 Senses has a turtle sanctuary there, so if you're there at the right time, I think it's usually about April, you know, they have all the turtles hatching on the beach and being released into the water. So there's a huge variety of properties for sure, yeah.
Okay. And another question is, you kind of mentioned a little bit about the primary rainforest. I think it was up in the north. What kind of wildlife, you'd kind of hinted a little bit about wildlife there. What kind of wildlife can one expect to see there?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, as in this part of the world, a lot of the bigger kind of primates and everything else have kind of disappeared. But certainly the birds that you see in that area in Pulong are fantastic. It's more, I would say it's more the birds and the insects. You know, we don't have the big primates in the forest, in the rainforest anymore. Mm-hmm. But I mean, you know, if I was being honest, you know, I wouldn't look at it as a for the wildlife as such. It's more it's more the fauna and the flora and fauna than it is the animals. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, and I mean, someone obviously has asked about the COVID situation in Vietnam. I mean, can you maybe just give an update as to where we are with that?
What COVID? I don't know what you're talking about. There's no COVID in Vietnam. Yeah, I mean, obviously, Vietnam's, the way they handled it is probably a little bit different to a lot of other countries. I think basically if I'm honest, they knew from the SARS and MERS outbreaks before that they didn't have the hospital capacity to deal with that kind of outbreak. So very, very quickly, when it actually broke out properly, and you have to remember, we had a small outbreak right when it started in China, and they basically took the military and they brought everyone, they surrounded this group of villages and they walked them in until they found the people who were sick, and they took them away and treated them and put them in quarantine and everything else. So they've got more of a trace and test system going on here. It's now been over 2 months since we've had any new cases. I'm not going to lie to you, life is basically coming back to normal. We don't see social distancing. I went to the airport last week to fly to Dalat. There was the domestic terminal. There were no temperature checks. I was wearing a mask, but probably half the people there were not wearing masks. And these are the locals. It was all domestic travel. And especially when you were at the restaurants and cafes and whatever else, you wouldn't even know it was here. My only worry now is that they may, because of the situation and the kind of reputation that they've now built as this golden child of not having any deaths and everything else, that they may keep the border closed a little bit longer. But we just don't know. We're still waiting to see what the government does in terms of letting people in. At the moment, September the 15th is the date that we have, but what that actually means, we don't know.
Okay, and can you also, I mean, again, I kind of alluded as well to kind of, for those of a bit longer, potentially kind of combining a trip with Cambodia and Laos.
Yeah.
Can you maybe explain again a little bit about the ease of traveling between these countries in terms of, I guess, border formalities, etc. as well? Sure.
I mean, certainly, in terms of organizing visas, we obviously can do that with you guys. We do it as much as we can before the travelers will come to the country or come to the region. We'll have sorted it all out previously. If you're flying in generally people will do Vietnam for a longer period of time, and then they'll go into Cambodia or go into or Laos, or they'll do both. But the bulk of the tour tends to be in Vietnam. Generally, people flow into Vietnam and then Cambodia. They'll get down to Saigon, and then they'll either cross by boat, which, as I mentioned, is a really great alternative, or they'll fly. So flying from Saigon, you can fly directly to Phnom Penh or to Siem Reap, and you can just get the visas on arrival there. We organize kind of a fast track system. So, if anyone's not wanting to wait in the lines, we've got someone that will push them through and get them through the other side quickly. You can actually now fly from Da Nang as well to Siem Reap. Going into Laos, predominantly people will fly because between obviously Hanoi and Luang Prabang or Vientiane, you've got to cross over those mountains in that Sapa region. So that's a really mountainous area. Unless you're going to do a proper overland trip, where obviously you would cross through by road, then you're going to fly. And the flight is, I mean, say, Hanoi to Luang Prabang is about a 45-minute flight. There's no cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign turns off for about 30 seconds. So there's a quick race to the toilet, and then you'd start to land again. So yeah, it's super convenient. It's not like, you don't have to bribe people at the borders, and there's no waiting. It's super quick. Yeah.
Great. All right. And again, someone also asked, are trips suitable for older people? Absolutely. I would say 90% of our clients are kind of in the, say, 50, 55 plus age category. I mean, the trips that we obviously develop as well are bearing that kind of age category in mind. There is, it is fairly, as long as you're fairly mobile and fit, there's nothing too arduous unless you've, selected a kind of itinerary where you want to do more intense kind of trekking or walking. So there shouldn't be a problem there. Nick, someone's asked, and I mean, I believe the answer is yes, but is it reasonably safe for older single female travelers in Vietnam?
Absolutely. Yeah, not a problem at all.
Yeah, great. And then there's also a question, do we require a medical certificate for accepting people on our trips? Not at this stage. What we will require is that people have adequate travel insurance. And from our understanding, the travel insurance industry are looking at now developing new insurance products that will hopefully insure against, pandemics or these kind of situations. So as long as you have adequate travel insurance, that should be sufficient. Of course, this is something that we kind of keep reviewing as time goes on. All right, and then Nick, any other tips? I guess obviously you gave a lot of tips, but something that you think is absolutely critical that people bear in mind when coming to Vietnam.
I mean, I think we've touched on them there as well, but the ones that I mentioned already. But I think the key is just managing your expectations. Like listening to the salesperson at Travel the Unknown. The experts there. They talk to us on a regular basis. Share your interests. Really let us design something that's going to work for you. And listen to us when we say, don't go to Sapa in November. If you've just been talking to us about how much you're looking forward to taking all these Instagram photos and seeing the rice paddies, just listen to us. We know what we're talking about. We live here. We talk to the guys at Travel the Unknown all the time. And if that's why you want to go to Sapa, then we need to change your itinerary or change your travel dates or something else. Sure. So just managing your own expectations and just recognizing that it's a big country. And it's not going to be the same all the way through.
Sure, perfect. Okay, Nick, thank you very, very much. And you can see on this slide, I've got two URLs or two website addresses there. On our traveltheunknown.com/Vietnam one, there's more information on Vietnam, of course, but also that short 1-minute video that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, which you can view in your own time. We have a number of other upcoming events that have now been confirmed. So in 2 weeks' time, we'll be taking you to South America to discover Brazil. It'll be more kind of an introductory presentation in terms of what one can see and do in Brazil. We'll be following that with Cambodia, which ties in nicely with Nick's presentation, and then to Colombia towards the end of August. Again, you'll be able to find more information about these events on the events page once they've been loaded on. And again, we'll be sending out newsletters about that. So again, I'd like to thank Nick for joining us from Vietnam, and for all of you for joining us this morning. I know it was at an earlier time than normal, but as you can see, the next talk we'll be doing will be at 6 p.m., not 5 p.m., but 6 p.m. on the 22nd of July when we'll talk about Brazil. So thank you all for joining us, and yes, keep well and stay safe. Thanks, Anne. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Nick.